Okay, we're going to talk one of my favorite rivalries to talk about, and it's a rivalry within a rivalry here today. Bird versus Magic in the Celtics versus Lakers rivalry. So this is a chapter in your Rivals book, and we will also combine it with a few different short video clips during this session. As well, there is a documentary that is posted online for you to watch that features Bird and Magic. It's produced by HBO in a style very similar to the 30 for 30 documentary style, but explains a lot of the background behind Bird and Magic that we didn't always get through the mainstream media as it concerns this rivalry. So one of the things to notice about this particular rivalry is that the author starts out the chapter in the Rivals book talking about the nature of rivalries. And he describes a rivalry as being meaningful when there is contrast and genuine competition. So we might think of that as what we've called parity in this class, meaning that there's an equal level of, or a somewhat equal level of competition between two entities, which means that the outcome becomes uncertain. And of course, that's one of the things that we love about sports, is that we don't know what the outcome is going to be in a sporting event. It's unscripted. And so that genuine competition combined with contrast is what the author feels like makes for a meaningful rivalry. And in this rivalry, we have lots of contrast between the teams, and the media certainly made it out to be lots of contrast between Bird and Magic, but I think you'll see over the course of our discussion here, and maybe you picked up on if you watched the documentary and hopefully read the chapter, that there's not as much contrast between Bird and Magic as you might have thought going into learning about this rivalry. One contrast between the teams is certainly the geography, right? You've got Lakers, West Coast. You've got Celtics, East Coast, far East Coast, so opposite sides of the country. However, as it relates to Bird and Magic, you don't really have that contrast in geography because both of them are from the Midwest. Magic from Lansing, Michigan, and went to his hometown, Michigan State Spartans, which is in East Lansing. And Bird from French Lick, Indiana, and went to originally Indiana University, but then ended up transferring to Indiana State after it didn't work out for him at Indiana, or he didn't feel like he fit in well at that big institution. So you've got one from Indiana, one from Michigan, both obviously Midwest, bordering states, but the teams that they went to, you had quite a contrast in geography. And there's other different types of contrast that are relevant here. It could be a contrast in temperament, which we see between these two individuals. It could be team temperament, which we also saw between Lakers and Celtics at what many would consider to be the height of the rivalry in the 1980s, where the Lakers are sort of thought of as showtime, fast break, Magic dishing the ball off, high scoring, and the Celtics thought of more as kind of like the spot-up shooter type team. But if you've watched highlights from that era, and we'll see just a few in the quick clips that we'll watch, but there were a lot in the documentary, you maybe picked up on the fact that, you know, the Celtics scored a lot of points too and were fast breakers in their own right, although maybe not quite to the level of Showtime, which is a high bar to reach when it concerns the fast break. Those games were regularly the final score ended in the 120s, right? So both teams weren't afraid to run up and down the floor to score the basketball. Strategic philosophy. So that could be a contrast between teams. We talked about that a little bit when we get into the El Clasico rivalry, and one side, Barcelona, trying to bring up their superstars from within their academy system. The other side, El Clasico, or Real Madrid, just buying the Galacticos, so the superstars from other teams. Of course, that's what the Yankees were also famous for. We have a contrast in aesthetics, meaning the look of the team, right? The Celtics are commonly thought of during the 80s as being the white team, and the Lakers are thought of as being the black team. Even though the Celtics had several black superstars, Dennis Johnson, Robert Parrish, Maxwell, Cedric Maxwell, several different players that were black star players in the Celtics. And even before them, Bill Russell, one of the original or one of the early NBA superstars, a black player on the Celtics. And then it could be a contrast in politics. Again, I go back to the El Clasico rivalry where we see one side, sort of leftist revolutionaries, Barcelona in the Catalonia region, wanting to break away from Spain, Real Madrid representing the Spanish nationalism in Spain's capital there in Madrid. And we saw politics arise in some other international rivalries as well, such as the one in Egypt with the terrible tragedy there. Fortunately, or I would say fortunately for us in the U.S., our politics don't get mixed up quite as much into our sports teams, or at least not yet. So politics was perhaps not part of this rivalry, but could be an element of contrast in other rivalries. So the author described genuine competition as being relatively evenly matched, and that's what I referred to a few minutes ago and said that I like to use the term parity to describe that idea, that they'll be relatively evenly matched. However, throughout the history of this rivalry, for a long time, the Celtics got the better of the Lakers. Until you got into the 1980s. And so it's not too dissimilar to the Yankees-Red Sox, where the Yankees were getting the best of the Red Sox for a very long period of time, decades and decades. They were getting the best of everybody in the league, just as the Celtics were in the NBA, winning, I think they won 10 championships in a row, which is pretty amazing, until the Lakers were able to essentially rival them or overcome their dominance in the 1980s. ESPN also has a series of documentaries. I believe it's actually three different documentaries that are part 1, part 2, and part 3 about the Lakers-Celtics rivalry that describes that huge obstacle that the Celtics were for the Laker franchise. I did not require that as something that you had to watch for this class, as it's pretty long. I think it's about 6 hours total. But instead you have the HBO documentary to watch, mostly focused on Bird and Magic. And the key to parity is that there's this doubt about who is better, right? It's debatable who's better, both between Bird and Magic, but also between the Lakers and Celtics teams. And that contributes to the rivalry and makes it more meaningful, as this author calls it. Let's look at the definition that I've developed with my research partner on rivalry, Dr. David Tyler, who's at Western Carolina University. As you may have noticed, I'm supporting NKU and our Hale U.S. Bank College of Business as part of my identity here on my shirt today. David is at Western Carolina, a similar university just outside of Asheville, and we do our research on rivalry together. And this is the definition we came up with for a rival. A highly salient outgroup that poses an acute threat to the identity of the in-group or to in-group members' ability to make positive comparisons between their group and the out-group. Okay, so how do we distill this down? That sounds kind of perhaps overly complicated. Well, when you think about a highly salient outgroup, it just means an outgroup that's very top of mind to you, that you think about a lot. And it poses an acute threat. That means it poses a imminent threat to your identity or to your ability to make a positive comparison between you and the outgroup, right? So when you think about a lot of the rivalries that we've talked about, and maybe some of the rivalries that you've experienced in your own playing career as an athlete or as a spectator of sports, usually there is some sort of threat element, meaning that one team or that the teams pose a threat to each other's goal of winning the division or winning the championship or being the best team in a region, right? And in this case, with the Lakers and Celtics, you have one franchise, like I said, in the East Coast, in the Eastern Conference, one franchise in the Western Conference on the West Coast. So they don't play each other that often, but they're threats to each other's dominance to be NBA champion, right? To be champion of the league itself. So before we talk about Bird Magic, it's important to understand the context that Bird and Magic were thrown into when we talk about Celtics versus Lakers. So in the 1940s and 1950s, the Lakers were extremely successful. They won 5 titles in 6 years. Back then, they weren't the LA Lakers, though. They were the Minneapolis Lakers. And then as you get into the 50s and 60s, the Celtics win 10 championships in 13 years. This at a period when the Lakers had some Hall of Fame superstars on their team, right? They had Elgin Baylor, they had Jerry West, who later becomes the silhouette for the NBA logo, was patterned after Jerry West, and then Wilt Chamberlain, also on those Laker teams in the 60s. And then after those years, when the Celtics were so dominant, but yet the Lakers had lots of superstars as well, the 70s was a tumultuous period for the NBA. There was lots of drug problems with the players, poor attendance at the games, not a very compelling product that consumers wanted to see. They couldn't really relate to the players. The TV ratings were poor. Sponsors were pulling out quite a bit and didn't want to be associated with the league and all of the PR, public relations problems they were having. And licensing was almost non-existent. You know, they didn't sell much merchandise at all or anything like that in the 70s. So there was just some questions as to whether the league was going to make it through and be viable after the 1970s. That's how bad it got. Well, let's watch this video here, which is a relatively quick history of the rivalry between the Lakers and Celtics.
Where a capacity crowd sees the NBA championship struggle between the Minneapolis Lakers and the Boston Celtics.
The NBA's most fabled rivalry was born in 1959 when the Celtics beat the Lakers in the finals.
The great Boston team goes on to win the National Basketball Association championship.
Throughout the 1960s, it seemed as if the teams were meeting every year in the finals.
The Boston Celtics are world champions.
And each time, Boston was the team celebrating in the end.
I hated green for a long time. I wouldn't wear anything green. It just got to the point where it was so frustrating to hear the noise and shouting after games that we had lost.
In 1969, LA traded for Wilt Chamberlain, the game's most dominant force, and they were sure that this would finally be the year they beat Boston.
The owner of the Lakers put out a sheet in all the seats. When the Lakers win the championship, the USC band would play Happy Days Are Here Again. The balloons in the rafters would fall down, and Chick Hearns would interview Elgin Baylor, Jerry West, and Wilt Chamberlain in that particular order.
When the players came in, I read it to all of them. I says, one thing that cannot go on, the Lakers cannot beat us. They can't beat us. But it's going to be fun to watch them get those balloons out one at a time.
Helped by Don Nelson's miracle shot, the balloons stayed in the rafters as Boston won again.
And there they go. They won it again. Bill, this must have been a great win for you. One more time.
15 years later, Bird and Magic would revive this intense rivalry.
I hated Larry. No other word to really use. And I disliked the Celtics.
As the 1984 finals began, Magic looked to end the Boston jinx.
This has to be one of the most decisive rounds in championship game history.
Today, when you see Magic slapping high fives and guys going behind her back and shooting layups on us all day long, it seems like somebody would try to put a stop to it. But until we get our hearts where they belong, we're in trouble.
Here's Magic off the mark. Here's Larry Bird. Chucking down the court.
It would be up to Bird to sound the Celtic rallying cry.
The Boston Celtics are the NBA World Champions.
1 year later, the Lakers would find themselves back in Boston.
Magic! Larry's gonna kill you! There's no magic in here!
But this time, LA would make history by becoming the first Laker team to beat Boston.
The Lakers answered the Celtics' true grit with a fierce, determined performance.
That whole mental and historical thing, the jinx, whatever have you, it all died at that point.
Does America believe in magic? You bet we do.
And when LA beat Boston again in 1987, Magic even made a believer out of Ferg.
Magic's just a great basketball player. He's the best I've ever seen, unbelievable. I don't know what to say.
It took 21 years for the teams to meet again in the finals, and in 2008, the Celtics beat the Lakers for their 17th NBA title. Last year, the Lakers added a 15th title to their collection. Now, 21 years later, the teams meet again.
Lakers versus Celtics have always been very intense rivals, and it's because of the people and the players that have come before all of us.
So you get some flavor there of the history behind the rivalry, even before Bird and Magic arrived, and of course those two superstars accelerated it. And they really saved the NBA in the 80s, and you get some idea of that from the HBO documentary about how their arrival into a rivalry that already existed, and the way that the media played up the differences between the two of them created for some great entertainment and some great theater within the sport of NBA basketball, and got sponsors back on board, got the media talking about the NBA in a positive light again, and also got sponsors back interested in the game. So what about Lakers Celtics as the teams go? What were some of the contributing factors to them becoming rivals in the first place? Well, certainly you had competitive parity between these two organizations, and you saw that described in the video where even though the Celtics kept getting the better of the Lakers in the 60s, you saw the Lakers were making it to the finals and playing the Celtics in the finals. Lots of defining moments between these two organizations, and star power even before Bird and Magic. I mean, we think about Bird and Magic now, or even after them, as you saw in the video there, Kobe and Kevin Garnett more recently. But you also have the geographic difference between these two organizations as well. Now, of course, for a while the Lakers were in Minneapolis until they moved in 1960 out to LA, which created the extreme geographic difference, right, where they could hardly be any further than they are from each other and still be in the mainland United States. And this created this cultural difference as well. Like, sometimes teams will take on the identity of their cities, and very much that's what's happened with the Lakers in becoming Showtime, right, and taking on this idea of Hollywood and having superstars sitting in the front row. Of course, Jack Nicholson is most famous for that historically at the Lakers games. And Boston, you might not have noticed, but in the video that we just watched, you heard the announcer use the term Boston's true grit, right? Referring to that team's grit and sort of blue-collar nature, which reflects what Boston, the city, is known for. So a cultural difference in that way. And then the media scheduling, and by that I mean the broadcast media. CBS was really smart about the way that they scheduled their TV games in the 80s when they're trying to grow the game again. They had the TV contract from the NBA, and of course they wanted it to be successful. And once Bird and Magic fell to the Lakers and Celtics, because even though the Lakers and Celtics don't play each other in the regular season very much, just 2 times in 82 games, they would schedule the Celtics as the early game in a broadcast doubleheader, and then the Lakers as the late game in the broadcast doubleheader. And so even though they weren't actually playing each other, it would sort of play off of the popularity of those two rivals of each other. Then onto the scene comes Bird and Magic, right? During this era, the great thing about their individual rivalry is that you had them meeting for the NCAA championship in 1979. So right before they come into the NBA, they actually their rivalry begins already. in a meeting for that March Madness championship. And here is a quick clip about Bird talking about that championship game. Oh, I guess we have to watch it on YouTube here. I already have it pulled up. Let's go here.
You know, when I was in college one time, I was watching a game on TV, and they had this home box office thing. And I turned on this game, they were playing against Russia. And I was watching Magic play, and I go, oh my God, that's the best player I've ever seen play, because I didn't follow basketball. And he was a sophomore at the time. So I remember telling a friend of mine, I said, they're going to win the NCAA championship this year. Well, we go all the way through undefeated, and there's Magic standing there. It's just like it was made to happen.
Everything was written with Bird versus Magic, Magic versus Bird, that whole thing. And it wasn't Indiana State versus Michigan State anymore. It was Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson.
We got beat because they were the best team. They was the best team in college basketball at that time. We knew we was going to play against a great team, Michigan State. By watching them on film, I knew it was going to be the best team we played against all year. But winning 33 games in a row, you know, you sort of take teams light. And I don't know mentally if I was as prepared as I should have been for that game, because you know, I didn't have a good game. I shot like 7 for 20 from the field, and you know, and our team relied on me to score. So if I had a week to go back on, probably that week to prepare and get ready for that game.
Realizing that this guy's going to be a nag or thorn in my side for a long time. I was so emotionally drained. I never felt like that after playing anybody. And so I knew that this was going to happen for a long, long time.
You know, one of the great things I think about that particular series of interviews is that you hear in Bird's voice how upset he is about losing that game decades later, right? Whenever he's doing that interview, he talks about, he knows exactly what he shot, 7 for 20 from the field, and he even says, if I could life, it'd be that week, you know, which is really interesting. I think that speaks to what the rivalry means to him and how competitive he is as an individual, and of course Magic is as well. Another interesting thing about the Bird-Magic rivalry at the professional ranks, they only met 18 times in the regular season. Again, with obviously the Celtics being in the Eastern Conference, Lakers being in the Western Conference, they only meet twice a year, and in a couple of those games, you know, one of them was hurt, especially toward the end of their career, and so didn't play. So they only actually played against each other 18 times in the regular season, and they played against each other 19 times in the NBA Finals, which is just amazing when you think about it. You know, that in order for them to meet in the finals, each one of their teams has to advance through every round of the playoffs before they can get to the finals, right? And to meet 19 times is pretty incredible. And you see from the records there that Magic did get the better of Bird, both in the regular season and in the finals in terms of number of games, and number of championships during that era. But still pretty impressive, and I would say still qualifies for parity between the two during that period. Here's a commercial that we will watch of Converse trying to take advantage of the star power and the rivalry between these two individuals in the NBA at the time.
Pair of Bird shoes for last year's MVP.
Yep.
When they made a pair of Magic shoes for this year's MVP.
Okay, Magic, show me what you got.
The Bird shoe, the Magic shoe. Choose your weapon from Converse.
All right, so maybe not the best actors in the world, but at the time, the best basketball players in the world. And one of the key points to that commercial is that they did actually shoot it in French Lick, Indiana. And if you watch the assigned documentary, you'll recall how shooting that commercial was like a turning point in the relationship between between Bird and Magic. So what they figured out is that even though that commercial and the media in general like to create this narrative out of the differences between the two of them, you know, Magic being much more outgoing, Larry Bird being much more reserved and kind of shy, Magic being a showman and enjoying the spotlight, and Bird more reserved, like we said. And then obviously the race, right, issue, Magic, a black player, Bird, a white player. The media likes to build up those differences. But when they shot the commercial together, Magic talks about how he realized, after the commercial, Larry's mom had them inside for lunch that she had made, or dinner that she had made, and he really realized how similar the two of them were, and how their upbringing in the Midwest with these family values and Midwestern ideals of work ethic and competitiveness and just that burning fire to compete against the best at anything, that they both shared that, and that their families had sort of instilled that in them. And so even though the media makes out all of these differences between the two, really Magic has this quote where he says, you know what, we found out that we were much more alike than we were different. We talked about competitive parity already. Certainly there's star power here. I mean, these are both two of the best NBA players of all time. Lots of defining moments between these two individuals. So not just their teams over history, but between these two individuals meeting in the NBA Finals 19 times, or over the course of 19 different games. In a few games, you have Bird hitting game-winning shots. You have Magic hitting game-winning shots in other games. They had their commercial and media appeal, and the difference in the narrative made out of the differences between the two individuals, the cultural, what was seen as cultural difference or racial differences between the two, fit into kind of the narrative of those two teams as the time, as one being a white team and one being a black team, even though not entirely accurate. That was the stereotype of those two teams. But as I mentioned, what Magic, and this is a quote from him, acknowledges is that we found out we were much alike, that there was really this similarity between the two of them. And I think that that's what led to the mutual respect that we obviously see between the two of them today. We're going to watch a quick clip of each of them talking about the other that illustrates the respect within this rivalry.
The Larry Bird retirement ceremony, they had it on a night when there was no game. That's how special, that's how popular, that's how great Larry Bird is. They filled the Boston Garden, and you couldn't get a ticket. Magic comes out, and it was just great, and he had the Celtic t-shirt on underneath, and the speech that Magic gave.
Larry Bird said that there will be another Larry Bird one day. And Larry, there will never, ever, ever be another Larry Bird.
To have all the fans come back to pay tribute and to say thank you. There was nothing like that on earth.
Tonight, my basketball career is officially over, and I had a blast. So tonight I leave. I leave basketball forever. I leave a game that I loved. Sorry, but I'm gone. I'm history. I dedicated my life to basketball, and I dedicated my life to the Boston Celtics. So, I say good night, Boston, and may God bless each and every one of you. Good night.
So there you get Bird's retirement ceremony and an excerpt from Magic. Here you get Bird at Magic's induction into the Basketball Hall of Fame.
First time I laid eyes on Magic Johnson, we played on an all-star team back in college. I could not believe what I was seeing in practice. I actually thought I was a bad judge of talent. because neither one of us got to play in the games. But I can remember going home and telling my older brother I just seen the best basketball player I'm probably ever going to see in my life. And he started quizzing me, asking me questions. Well, how good is he? I said, well, he's 6'9", he can handle the ball like a 5'9" guard, he can shoot the ball, he can pass like you can't believe. He goes, oh, come on. Well, after this 1979, the NCAA tournament, my brother come up to me, he says, yeah, he's a lot better than you.
So some funny stories, but I think you could see the mutual respect between those two because they achieved such a high level and they realized that they were very similar to each other. Quotes from the chat, or a couple short phrases or words from the chapter describing this, that they're inextricably linked. They'll always be linked. They're inseparable. Again, this idea of symbiosis, right? That because of the other one, each individual excelled and wouldn't be the same without that rival there with them. So let's think about, like I like to do, what makes this a rivalry worth noting. We've got most of the elements here listed in terms of the parity, the star power, the defining moments, the media appeal that plays off of what is the perceived cultural difference between the two, but yet the similarity of the individuals beyond just their skin color or apart from their skin color, how similar they were, I think is what fueled the two of them in the interpersonal rivalry. And then of course you had the geographic difference of their two teams and the cultural difference of their two teams in the cities that they represented that also played into this rivalry. So a very fun rivalry to follow. Again, make sure you watch the documentary posted online about it and read the chapter in the Rivals book.